Hi, this is Jeff, and the next question we received was from Bambi in Palo Alto. And it's a question we get fairly often, and but I thought you might be interested to hear the answer again. And Bambi's curious about how we decide which grapes we want to source, and how we determine which varietals we want to work with, and how something gets onto our radar screen and into our portfolio of offerings. And it's kind of a long story, Bambi, but I made wine for 16 years before I started my own label. And during those 16 years, I made wine in the Napa Valley, up here in Amador County, for Jerry Lohr down in Monterey and Paso Robles. And so I had some experience with different growers, different varieties, and I had my favorites. So that's really where the beginnings came from, is I returned to growers that I'd had success with in the past when I made wine for other folks. And that's really where things started. At the time, I didn't have the money to invest in a vineyard. And to be nimble and not to be saddled with a variety that might not be the right variety for that region, it just made a lot more sense to buy grapes. And we still do, even though we own a small 10-acre vineyard. 95% of the wine we produce comes from grapes we purchase. And we go all over the state. But some of the interesting stories about how we got involved with particular growers, and it varies. But in the beginning, we went back to growers that we knew and that I was confident. Jim Fox, Dick Cooper for Barbera, Tom Dillion for Primitivo. So we weren't really risking much. We were pretty confident about the quality and the style and the flavors we were going to be able to produce. So that's how it started. And then I approached a grower, Ken Wilson in the Delta, because at J. Lohr, we'd bring in 130 tons of his Petite Sirah from Clarksburg. And it always made a delicious wine. And it was a wonderful wine to use as a blender to beef up color and flavor and texture in wines. And the great thing about it is the tannins weren't over the top. They weren't astringent or chewy or mouth drying. Only all those grapes were under contract. And I wasn't able to get but a handful from Ken. And I wanted to make a little more, but he referred me to a neighbor, Enver Salman. And we approached Enver, and he provided us with our beginnings for Petite Sirah. And then, a few years after, I'd say 4 or 5 years after we had started a Petite Sirah program with Enver, he let us know that they were also growing Cabernet Franc. Now, I had never had much success with Cabernet Franc down at J. Lohr. As a matter of fact, it was a very frustrating variety for me to work with. But we did. We decided to bring in 2 tons from Enver. And it turned out to be a delicious wine. Not a Bordeaux style, but more of a Loire Valley style. Lighter, fruitier, easier to drink, less extracted. And so that 2-ton program is now close to 11 tons. Ron Silva, our source for Grenache, was recommended to us by a colleague in Livermore when I lamented the fact that I couldn't find and produce a decent Gamay, because I wanted a light luncheon-style red in our offerings, and expressed my frustration. And he says, "Well, you need to go talk to Ron Silva and try some of his Grenache." Well, Ron, he's Portuguese. He grows nothing but Iberian Peninsula varieties, and he's got everything. So we've tried Trincadeira, Sejão, Tannat, just a Touriga Nacional, Touriga Francesa from Ron. And once we hook up with the grower and we see that there's a flavor profile and a style and a character and a passion for grapes, we're interested in finding what they are curious about. We'll explore it with them. So that's a lot of the reasons why we try different grapes. Sometimes, one time, two interesting stories. One was Ron Silva. We first did Grenache and only Grenache, and then I sent him a mixed case of wine just so that he'd know the style and the flavors that we were interested in producing. And one Saturday night, about 10 o'clock, he called me, and he and Kathy had just finished a bottle of our Petite Sirah. And he just said, wow, that was the smoothest Petite Sirah I've ever had. How were you able to manage the tannins? And I explained what we did, and he said, well, if you can do this with Petite Sirah, I have a variety for you to try. It's called Tannat. Well, I looked it up. Tannat's got a reputation for being pretty gnarly. The French often blend Cabernet into it, Cabernet Sauvignon into it to soften it. But that Tannat actually climbed on the board more as a challenge than anything else. I didn't drink a lot of Tannat and say, oh wow, let's make a Tannat, this tastes good. But lo and behold, we tried it from Ron, and we've got a nice little following for our Tannat, and it turns the head of a lot of judges in various fairs too, so it does quite well. And another interesting story was a colleague from J. Lohr at the state fair approached me with a glass of wine. And Bill asked me, he says, so he hands me the glass, Jeff, I want you to taste this and tell me what you think of it. Well, I know Bill. I'd worked with Bill for a number of years, and I knew he was throwing me a curveball. He asked, well, what do you think it is? And I tasted it, smelled it. It was just incredibly floral and very perfumed. And I said, knowing he was trying to trick me or to challenge me, I said, you know, I think this is not a grape wine, but a fruit wine. It's from Bargetto in Santa Cruz, and it's raspberry wine. And he looked at me like, no, it's Touriga. It's Touriga from Fenestra Winery in Livermore, and it just won Best Fenestra at the State Fair, or excuse me, Best Touriga at the State Fair. Well, I was enamored. This wine had a lot of luscious dark fruit, and the tannin was soft, and the color was inky. So when I found out that Ron Silva was the source of those grapes, it just made sense to go ask Ron for a couple tons of Touriga. And sure enough, it's one of our wine club selections, and we've got a nice little following for it. So those are some of the stories about how we approach particular varieties and how we've gotten involved with some of these off the beaten track wines. It only works because we've got a tasting room, and you guys get a chance to come in and taste the wines. If we tried to sell them through the three-tier system and through a retailer or a restaurateur, they're going to sit and collect dust. But if you get a chance to taste them, we're confident you're going to like them and see the applications, and they're going to find a home as small as it is. So, thanks, Bambi. Appreciate the question.